Try driving to work without the radio on. Try getting on the subway without popping in the AirPods. Try when you get home from work, try putting your phone in a drawer. Try going to dinner with friends without taking your phone. And maybe you're thinking, well, how would I take a picture of my food? Which is a legitimate question. But just maybe soak up the memory, maybe soak up the moment.
This is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 232. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host. And in today's episode, you'll hear my interview with Clay Scroggins. If you're unfamiliar with Clay, let me just give you a little bit of background about who he is. He is the lead pastor of Buckhead Church in Atlanta, Georgia, a church of over 9,000 people, and he provides visionary and directional leadership for all of the local church staff and congregation in Atlanta. And what I love about Clay, he's been on the podcast before, and in fact, if you want to go back and listen to our initial interview, you can do that in episode number 187 of the podcast. But Clay's story is phenomenal. He actually started as the facilities intern at the church, and obviously worked his way up, and now he has a huge leadership role at the church. And he actually shared a lot of this journey and the lessons that he learned in his first book, which was called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And we talk a lot about this book in the interview that I mentioned. And so if you enjoy this interview with Clay, I encourage you to go back and listen. And if you haven't gotten the book yet, I highly recommend it. It made a big impact on my wife and I. So again, that book is called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And as of the recording of this podcast episode, Clay just released his brand new book called How to Lead in a World of Distraction, which is the entire focus of this interview. And if our world and if leaders have ever needed a message in today's world, this is it. How do you lead in a world with so many distractions? I know I need this book. I need the content. I need Clay's tips. It was funny. The day I interviewed Clay for this was the day his book released. And I actually had a friend prior to the interview, didn't even know I was interviewing Clay, messaged me a photo of the book and said, "You need this." And I think she was trying to tell me something. And so I was so grateful to be able to spend this time with Clay and learn from him how I can lead in a world of distraction. And I just know this is going to add value to you. So after you listen to the podcast episode, make sure you pick up a copy of the book. I also didn't mention, do you know that Clay, and you'll hear him talk about this, Clay has 5 kids. So if anyone's learned something about leading in a world of distractions, it's him. I know I was anxious to learn from him. So hey, get ready for the interview. But before we dive in, just one announcement for you. I want to let you know that we have an official date for our second annual L3 One-Day Leadership Conference. It's going to be on Friday, March 13th, 2020, right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we are so excited. We listened to everyone's feedback from the first conference and are absolutely committed to making this year's conference 10 times better than the first one. And so look for details soon. We'll be releasing our entire speakers list and all the content and registration information soon. You can learn more at l3oneday.com. Again, that's l3oneday.com. But leaders, save the date, Friday, March 13th. Get it on your calendar. Plan on bringing your team, and I hope to see you there. L3 One Day 2020. Can't wait. With that being said, let's dive right into the interview with Clay, and I will be back at the end with a few announcements. Well, hey, Clay, thank you so much for jumping back on the podcast again. And you have a brand new book out, How to Lead in a World of Distraction. And can you just give us a brief life update since the last time you were on the podcast? What does your life look like now in your leadership? I know you have a new role. Can you just share that with the audience?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Doug, thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me back on. I feel like if the first one was a date, this is definitely a second step in our relationship. So we're really going somewhere now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a pastor in Atlanta at North Point. I guess our umbrella organization is called North Point Ministries, but we have 7, I guess depending on how you count it, maybe 6 churches in the Atlanta area. And I lead our, I was at North Point for the last 4+ years, which is in Alpharetta. It was our first campus, our original location. And I've moved to what's called Buckhead Church, which is kind of in the heart of, it's in the city of Atlanta, but it's in kind of, Buckhead's kind of the business entertainment district of Atlanta. So it's definitely a different crowd, same job, different location, basically. But it's been good. And in the middle of all that, we decided as a family we were going to move. And so we now live just a lot closer to downtown Atlanta. So big changes.
Yeah. And tell me about the book. So How to Lead in a World of Distraction. I mean, if anyone could write this, I mean, it's curious the time you're writing it. New position, you moved, you have a ton of responsibility. You have 5 kids. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
So why did you write this book and why now?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it was, I started writing about it and then I started noticing how distracted that I was, or how many distractions I had in life, or if I just bumped into some unique challenges that just happened along the way. I don't know, but it definitely, this book it was already relevant for me, but it became even more relevant, to your point, over the last, I would say over the last year for sure. The way the thing happened is obviously living in the world that we live in, there are just so many more distractions today than there have ever been before. We're living in a very distracted world. There's a plethora of them. And obviously, technology is a big part of that there's, we can spend as much time on social media as we like. Instead of just watching one show, you can now binge on an entire season. Online shopping can provide as much or as little of a time warp as you want it to be. But worse than any of that, what I found is that the problem with distraction is what we're missing on the other side of them. That there was a day where people just went into a doctor's office and just sat down and looked around and maybe read a magazine or maybe had a conversation with somebody around you. And now everybody's, we're all walking around with our noses in our phones and just so distracted by what's around us that it's affected our life in ways that I don't even think any one of us could realize. Obviously, there's the challenge of, driving with distractions is one illustration, but it goes so much deeper than that. But this book is not really about, hey, be careful with social media or watch out for technology. The book is really about what is on the other side of distraction that we're missing. And what's on the other side is discovery, that there is this opportunity to discover something that we, I don't know, maybe 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago would have just dealt with the whatever the emotions are that we were dealing with, we would have just dealt with them. But now we just so easily distract ourselves from dealing with those. So it's really a book about dealing with our emotional baggage so that we can become better leaders, and our distractions are the greatest thing that are in our way.
Yeah. And in the book, you talk about not only is this an issue in our society, it's also costing us something. And as leaders, it probably magnifies the cost. Can you talk about the cost of being so distracted in the world we live in? What cost does that have in a leader's life?
Yeah, I opened up with an illustration about being distracted while my family was on a little weekend trip to Chattanooga, and I left my keys in my car, and my car was stolen that night. So that's what it cost me, but it cost us way more than that. I mean, I eventually got my car back. I think there was a couple $1,000s worth of damage to it that some people had obviously taken on a joyride, and it got fixed. But the greater danger for every single one of us is that it's costing us. There's an opportunity cost for sure. The simple idea of an opportunity cost is that, there is the decision that you're making, and that's worth something. But what sometimes is a greater cost is what you could have been doing with that time, what you could have been doing instead of being distracted. And that's the danger of distraction, is that distractions pay off. I mean, distractions work. They deliver on their promise. They keep us from focusing on whatever it is that we're focusing on. So obviously the opportunity cost is a significant cost to us, but also there's the lack of traction in our life. That, that simple word distraction, if you just break down the word, that traction is the ability to gain momentum, the ability for our wheels to propel us forward. And I think so many of us are living distracted days, and it's leading to tractionless lives. that we're living lives that don't have the kind of momentum that we want because we're just so easily distracted by what's on our left or what's on our right, as opposed to dealing with what's right there in front of us. So those are probably the two most valuable things that we should be paying attention to that are on the other side of these distractions they're growing. I mean, obviously there's a growing sense of distraction. I do this simple little exercise whenever I go talk to an audience on this topic. I'll say, hey, just quick question. Let me poll the crowd. Would you say there's more distractions today or less distractions today than there's ever been before? And obviously there's a resounding, there's more. I mean, because this is just an obvious reality that we're living in, that there's just more of everything. There's more information, there's more technology, there's more opportunity, more activity, and it seems to be growing louder and louder.
Yeah, and so talk to leaders today. What can leaders do to actually deal with this, right? I mean, go ahead.
Well, I meant to say that when you asked that question, because you asked about leadership specifically, and this book is, I wrote it under the How to Lead, with the How to Lead concept, because it really is a leadership issue. The best leaders are the most emotionally healthy leaders. The best leaders are the leaders that are most aware of their own emotions, but also most able to regulate their emotions and manage their emotions. And then also that they're more able to anticipate the way their emotions are going to affect other people and how they should respond to other people. But you can't become more emotionally healthy if you're unaware, if there's emotions inside of you that you just don't know about. So I think it's ultimately a way to lead yourself, is to deal with it, to turn down the noise of the distraction and to listen to what it's masking or listen to what's behind it.
Yeah. And you, obviously you lead yourself well, you have teams to lead. I'm just curious, how have you grown in self-awareness, and what are some ways that actually you have become self-aware, whether that's through others, through your family, your spouse? I'm just curious, what's your journey to self-awareness been? And then, I'll follow up from there.
Yeah, that's a super important question. I would just start by saying, I think you have to approach self-awareness from the assumption that that there's a lot about your life that you don't know. There's a proverb, I think it's maybe Proverb 12:1, that says, the one who loves knowledge loves discipline, but the one who hates correction is stupid. And it's just a real simple concept that if you like knowledge, then you'll be open to feedback. But if you hate correction, you're just dumb. I mean, if you're at the point in life where you think, no, I am very self-aware. In fact, I have learned that some of the most unaware people will tell you how self-aware they are. And so I would just start by knowing that you might be 60, maybe at most 70% aware of what's really going on inside of you. And I think if you can just begin with that assumption, it will create a little humility in you, and it will help you ask more questions, which is ultimately I think curiosity is really it's the way we become more self-aware, is we have to ask the questions. Why am I feeling that? Why did I do that? Where is that coming from? How long has it been there? What is that emotion trying to achieve? What I've learned about emotions is our emotions are messengers. Our emotions are trying to tell us something. So if you're jealous about something, that emotion is trying to tell you, hey, there's something that you don't have that other person has, and you don't like that. If you're angry about something, that emotion is trying to tell you, hey, you're lacking something, you're missing something, you didn't get your way, somebody got something more, they got more than you got. And I think just the simple process of being curious of those emotions, I think it's what allows us to really get on the other side and to discover.
Yeah. And is this something that you find is natural in people, or most people naturally curious and want that feedback and correction? I'm curious how you guys view this from a staff perspective. Is this something you try to identify in the interview process, or is this something as young leaders come on staff with you and your team? What are some things you guys do intentionally to bring self-awareness around them and help them grow in that? I'm just curious process-wise.
Yeah, I think there's probably not a specific process we use, but something that I do pretty commonly is when I'm interviewing someone, I will just ask them. I'll say, hey, if I were to call your former employer or your current employer, or if I were to call the people that on your reference sheet and ask them, hey, give me this person's, one or two, three top areas of growth. What do you think that person will say? And, if they have no clue, or if they tell me something that is just completely way off from what that reference will tell me, that's a pretty big caution. That's a pretty big yellow flag, because I've just learned that if you can get someone who is aware of their shortcomings, aware of their weaknesses, then you've got a person that you can really deal with. But it is, we all know this to be true, but you just can't grow in an area that you're unaware of. And you certainly can't grow in an area that you're unwilling to admit needs to be grown. And so it's just it's one of the most important concepts of emotional health is a person's ability to be aware. So yeah, I do think it's something you can look for in an interview process. The biggest challenge, and we've all experienced this, is when you're working with someone who is exhibiting a sense of unawareness or lack of awareness in a particular area, it is almost impossible to point it out to that person. Self-awareness is something we have to come to on our own. We have to discover on our own, which is why these distractions are so important, because, we've really got to get a rhythm in life where we are constantly turning down the noise to listen to what's underneath the hood, to listen to what's inside of our hearts, inside of our souls, to listen to the emotions that we're walking around with.
Yeah, and in the book you talk about this. You talk about 4 noise canceling habits. Can you walk us through those at a high level before people dive into the book?
Yeah, I really enjoy practical, helpful content, and so my hope in writing this book, I was carrying this concept for the last couple of years. It started with an illustration about white noise. Do y'all use white noise with your kids?
Yep,
sleep?
Every night.
We do too. And I just was thinking about that concept one day. It's a very interesting, to me, it's an interesting idea that you crank up noise really to distract your kids from the ambient noise that might wake them up. Because, as a parent, sleep is like one of the greatest commodities that you have.
Amen. Yeah.
And so we do the same thing. We turn up noise in all of our kids' room. And it's an interesting concept that the louder the noise is, the more it actually blocks out. And so I started thinking of that in the realm of distractions, that basically that's what we're doing all day long, is every single one of us has our finger on the dial of some kind of noise that we're turning up when we don't want to feel whatever it is that's inside of us. A white noise is a masking device. It masks the emotions we don't want to hear. It masks the noises we don't want to hear, but in the same way, it masks the emotions that we don't want to feel. And so what I tried to do is give some practical rhythms or habits that they're not surefire ways to be able to listen to what's there, but they certainly put us further down the road on creating a more sustainable pace and a healthier way of life, so that we can keep our hearts clean and keep our antennas cleaned off. And they're all rooted in spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices. I use different language just to try to make it approachable for somebody that's not a Jesus follower, but they're really just spiritual practices put into concepts that hopefully any kind of leader, Christian or non-Christian, could grab a hold of. So the first one is to find your why, or to simplify. Those concepts really work hand in hand, that the more simple your life is, the more able you are to understand why you are alive and to be driven by that why. And a simple example would be, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg. I think the two of them both wear the same outfit every single day. Steve Jobs wore that black turtleneck every day. And the idea was just to simplify, to limit the decisions that he had to make. And it was all driven by his why, that he wanted to create something that people would use, and he wanted to create something really simple as well. And that drove him. That really was the spine that drove him in a real powerful way. And so that simplicity really helps us find our why. And when we find our why, it really creates simplicity for us as well. So that's the first one. The second one is to get quiet. None of us like silence. I actually hate silence, but we've got to have times in our life where we're turning down the noise intentionally to be able to listen to what's really there. That's not easy to do, but if you can find a place, if you can find a time, if you can find an actual practice that you can do. I don't think it's a great idea to just be quiet for the sake of solitude. Sometimes that's helpful, but I like to have directed solitude. So in the mornings, I try to turn down all the noise and just try to listen. And I use 3 simple phrases: I want, I need, and I surrender. And I use those phrases just to lead my mind or to lead my heart to figure out what is there. I want. What do I want? And sometimes you discover things. Sometimes you learn things. I need. What is it that I need? And then I surrender. What is it that I need to surrender, or that I don't want to surrender? But that's the simple idea, is to get quiet so that you can listen to what's there. Thirdly, that we would learn to speak to ourselves. The most common conversation that you have throughout the day is the one that you have with yourself. Psalm 42 is a great example of this. David says, "Soul, my soul, why are you so downcast within me?" He's talking to himself, and then he doesn't leave himself there. In fact, just before that, he said, "My tears have been my food day and night." But then he says, "Soul, soul, why are you so downcast within me? Put your hope in God and sing his praises forever." So he's trying to lift himself up out of what he's dealing with. Great leaders know how to do that. Great leaders know how to speak to themselves in ways that are sometimes challenging and are sometimes caring and are sometimes encouraging. And it's a powerful concept to be able to learn to do that in a healthier way. And it helps us turn down the noise. And a lot of times the noise comes in the form of other people's opinions or other people's thoughts or other people's desires for our life. But learning to speak to ourselves and lead ourselves in the way that we know we want to move is a powerful concept. And then the last one is to press pause. And it's really just the concept of fasting or the concept of Sabbath. My wife does such a great job of this. At the beginning of every month, she picks something in her life to just stop. And she doesn't stop it forever, but she'll stop it for a month. And so maybe it's, hey, this month I'm not going to eat desserts. This month I'm not going to buy any, I'm not going to have any spontaneous spur of the moment purchases. One particular month, she decided to get off social media for a month. Wow. And I actually joined her on that one. And it was such a powerful thing for me because I learned a lot about myself. I'm not addicted to social media. I'm addicted to my phone. That's a little more dangerous. Wow. I really feel this pressure to put my life out there in such a way that other people would find it appealing or maybe even be jealous of it. And I didn't know that was there until I turned down the noise and listened to what was there. And so the simple pathway that I try to lead people through, that I'm trying to lead myself through, is to just identify your noise, to experiment with your noise, and then to listen to what it's masking. And I think doing that is one of the most important habits for leaders, because great leaders turn down the noise low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious of their emotions.
Yeah, I'm curious on the pressing pause and getting quiet. Do you have any other cadences, whether it's every year you go on a 2-week vacation because you just need to unplug for that long? I'm just curious, do you and your wife do anything intentionally with 5 kids? I'm sure you guys are running all the time to make sure that your marriage is, you're pressing pause and spending time in your marriage. I'm just curious what systems you have in your place or in your life to make sure that those things don't get lost in the noise.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we're just as susceptible to missing each other as anybody else. And, simply having a date night has been huge. We don't have family that lives really close to us. I've got an older sister that lives in Atlanta, but she just had a baby herself, so she's pretty swamped. So we don't have a lot of built-in babysitters, but we've just had to budget for a date at least once a month, most of the time twice a month. And, the date is an interesting thing because you can't just date. You can't just go on dates with your spouse. There's got to be that daily rhythm of life. But if you just do the daily rhythm and miss the intentional investment, that's not great either. So a great relationship has that consistency, the dailies, but it also has that intentionality. Hey, we're going to sit down and specifically ask each other some important questions. And you can't do that all the time, but to do that on a semi-regular basis, I think is really what keeps a relationship healthy. So again, that's not rocket science, but for us, that rhythm keeps us out of the rut of being just roommates, I would say, or partners.
Yeah. And can you talk about the same thing only from a work perspective? You have a ton of responsibility at work. You obviously have family. How do you decide what gets your time at work and that you're laser focused on what's most important versus getting caught up in the 1,000 priorities probably that your team would happily hand off to you and distract you?
I'd love to talk about that. We have a concept that we use at work a lot. I did not come up with this, but this was in a book that some of our founders wrote a couple of years ago called The 7 Practices for Healthy Ministry. And one of the practices is work on it and not working in it. And that's been a real important thing for us because 4 Disciplines of Execution calls it the whirlwind, that all of us we're so apt to get caught up in the whirlwind of the calendar, the schedule. Here comes another Sunday. But we do the same thing with our calendar. We get whipped by a calendar. Our calendar gets on top of us, and it becomes demanding. It becomes really like a slave owner. And to get above that on a routine basis and say, hey, we're going to work on it. For me, it's my morning routine that helps me, that gives me the space to be able to say, what is most important right now? What is most important in my week this week? What is it that I have to get done that's urgent? But what should I be working on? And to have that space, I mean, it's the simple habit of getting quiet, but it's also that ability to speak to yourself and ask some of those important questions of what am I trying to accomplish? What do I want to be said about me at the end of this year? What do I hope to have accomplished? Asking some of those really difficult, high level, work on it type questions, I think is the key to clearing off the antennas. I love that simple illustration of, you remember when cell phones first came out and you had that antenna that you had to pull up, whenever you really wanted to get reception. And there were times where you had to clean that off. I mean, another example would be blowing in the Nintendo game,
yes.
Back when you had to do that, when Tetris was a little bit fuzzy. And that simple idea, I think, is what turning down the noise is all about. It's all about just keeping the antenna clean so that you can be your best self, so that you can carry others well, and so that you can hear from God, so that you can know what His vision is for your life, for your team, for your organization. I think it's probably becoming more and more of a lost habit in our culture that I'm really hoping this book helps us reclaim.
I love that. Is there any last takeaways that you want listeners to hear from the book? Anything else about leading well in a world of distraction?
Yeah, I would just say, don't be afraid to experiment. And just because you don't hear anything, don't just quit. Don't give up on it. But, try some different things. Try driving to work without the radio on. Try getting on the subway without popping in the AirPods. Try when you get home from work, try putting your phone in a drawer. Try going to dinner with friends without taking your phone. And maybe you're thinking, well, how would I take a picture of my food? Which is a legitimate question. But maybe soak up the memory, maybe soak up the moment. But I would say, don't be afraid to be courageous and maybe cut out something for a day or a week or a month. And the point is to listen to what's there, to listen to what that distraction is masking. I know this is kind of cliche to say, but you don't really ever know what you're going to find. And that's the beauty of it. That's the brilliance of this simple metaphor, is that if you can turn down the white noise, resist the urge to turn it up, you might just learn something about yourself. And I think you have to convince yourself that it really is what's going to make you a better leader, because it's never going to be urgent to do this. All of the urgent things you sometimes can become the very distraction that keeps us from growing the most.
Wow.
And so I would just encourage people that listen to L3 to just be wild, be zany, try some things. It really is worth it, because on the other side of distraction is a boatload of discovery that's going to help you grow to become a more emotionally healthy person, which is going to allow you to become a better leader. And that's going to benefit the people around you today, but it's going to benefit countless others for a lifetime. I think it's really worth it.
And I have to ask, this was your second book. And was it easier than writing the first one, to all the aspiring authors out there? Once you get through the first one, are you going to write, you're going to be the next John Maxwell and have 10,000 books, or what was that like?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if John Maxwell supposedly flies privately pretty much everywhere he goes. And so if writing books leads me to that, yes, I definitely will. No, I don't think any one of us are the next John Maxwell. I'm trying to be the best version of myself, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a couple different questions embedded in that question, but was it easier? No, I would say in some ways it was harder, because the expectation, I mean, it's like having a second child. That second child doesn't know that it's the second child. It still needs everything that the first child needed. And I think my wife and I always thought, oh, the next one will be easier because we know what we're doing now. No. In fact, it's harder in some ways because you thought it was going to be easier, and expectations naturally breed. Expectations just create a lot of discontent. And then I would say there is something about making a decision in life that you are going to be a producer and not a consumer, and not just a consumer. Everyone's a consumer, but I think that was a switch that happened in me a while ago, where I just decided, you know what? I still go to conferences. I still listen to tons of podcasts. I still read a lot. I really enjoy journals, magazines, articles more than long form books, which seems a little hypocritical because I just wrote one. But I think just deciding that your voice matters and you have something to offer, and you want to join in the stream of people that are either producing content or curating content, which I think that's what you're doing. That's actually brilliant, that you're saying, hey, I don't have to have content. I'm just going to point people to content that I find helpful. And being a curator of content in 2019 is as important as being a producer. But I think just making that decision is, I think it's a big deal. And I think it's a switch that can flip inside of you that might just open up some new doors of opportunity. So I would just encourage anybody listening to just make a decision to become a producer, become a curator. And who knows what God will do with it.
Yeah, and I want to ask in a second how people can connect with you online, but I know one way they can is you did several interviews with some very high-end leaders for the book, and I believe I saw that there's an encore possibility for people to view these interviews. You interviewed Dave Ramsey, Sheryl Sandberg, and Bob Goff, and I'm just curious, you're on the interviewee side. What did you learn through interviewing those leaders? And personally, I'm just curious, what did you learn in the preparation for that? Did you put a lot of prep into it, or did you just show up and were curious?
I mean, one of the things I learned is I think I like sitting in your seat more than I like sitting in my seat. I just enjoy, I think I'm naturally a curious person, but I've just learned more and more the value of curiosity. Arrogant people don't ask questions. It's people that have humility that ask questions. And so I want to be a person that's growing in humility, and curiosity is it's like a workout. It's like an exercise for humility. And so I really enjoyed, to be able to sit down with those leaders was just such a thrill to be able to ask them some questions. And, it's amazing. I'm sure you found this with your podcast, but, people are more accessible oftentimes than you think they are, especially when you say, everyone has an ego. And so when you say, hey, I really value what you have to say, could I ask you some questions and get your advice on some stuff? And I really would love to hear your take on some challenges that a lot of people are facing. There's most people will say yes to that. So that's what happened with particularly with Bob Goff, Sheryl Sandberg. Dave Ramsey, I had actually done something at their company, but I definitely prepared a lot for the Sheryl Sandberg interview. Bob Goff, I did not prepare at all, because that guy, man, he is like a wild stallion. No one fences that guy in. And so I just knew this interview is going to go 100 different directions, and I will not even, I'm along for the ride. Like, I'm definitely not in the saddle.
And in this case, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Cause I did the interview in a car, but, and that was the way it went down. I mean, that was probably a hour and a half conversation that we took about the best 8 or 10 minutes out of it. And you know how Bob Goff is. I mean, like, he's got his phone number in the back of his book, which is still his phone number. So I'm asking him all about that, like about being available. And, you know, he said this one line that I'll never forget. He said, you know, I just realized that God, that he didn't make me more athletic than I am. He didn't make me better looking than I am, but he did give me the opportunity to be available. And I've just decided I'm going to be available. And I thought, that's so profound. And then, like, you know, 30 minutes later, his phone rings and he's like, oh, here's somebody right here. And then he answers the phone while we're on the, you know, I'm like, hey, Bob, like, I asked you to do this thing. But it actually, you know, it was very, it was great. And to hear him navigate, like, he was so caring to the guy, but it was probably like a 60-second phone call. Wow. And he was just like, hey, man, what's up? What can I do for you? And, you know, the guy was like, oh, Bob, just wanted to say hello. And he's like, great, man. Great hearing from you. Thanks. I'm sitting here with Clay. You know, he says hello. Whatever.
I had a coworker who literally called him. Bob spent 4 minutes with him. I don't remember what he told him, but literally transformed the kid's life. I mean, pretty crazy. That blew me away. And I mean, obviously he talks about that everywhere he goes. It was just amazing. He is a legend. That guy is such a genuinely terrific person. So, but if you go to howtoleadonline.com, you can get more information about that encore, and you can definitely catch those interviews. I think there's some bonus content that goes along with, if you order a certain amount of the books or something, then you can get some of those interviews and watch them with your team if you can't make the encore. So there's some different ways that we try to make that accessible to people. Great. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
I would just say that where you are in life, it matters, and that you're not wasting time, and you're not, that you're not missing out on something, that you really are in a place where you can learn whatever it is that you're meant to learn. I think seeing life as a laboratory where if you get stuff wrong, it's just, all right, now I've learned something. I think that's a better way to approach your day is, God, what do you want to show me today? What do you want to teach me today? So that's where I am. I feel more wide open to learn today than I have ever felt maybe in my life. So, and I think that's a healthy place to be. I want to stay there. And so I hope people listening will just know that what's happening in your life today, that there's so much joy in it, so much good in it, even if it feels difficult.
Yeah. Well, Clay, hey, thank you so much for being available for this interview. And thank you just for being a producer and putting out a great book. And I encourage everyone to pick up a copy. I'll include links in the show notes and promote this everywhere I go. So just thank you, and appreciate everything you do through your leadership.
Thank you, Doug.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to my interview with Clay Scroggins. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with Clay and links to everything we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 232. Also, as I mentioned, this was the second time Clay was on the podcast. You can go back and listen to our initial interview in episode number 187, and we talk all about his book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. Highly encourage you to go back and listen to that. Great content there. And of course, I encourage you to buy copies of both of his books and take your team through them. It'll add a ton of value to you, and you will be blessed by them. So thank you for that. As always, while you're on the website, if you want to stay up to date with everything we're doing here at L3, you can simply sign up for our email list on our website, and you will get a free copy of my ebook, Making the Most of Mentoring, which is my step-by-step process for getting meetings with leaders. And you'll also obviously get weekly updates on everything we're doing here at L3. I want to thank our sponsor, Alex 2 Landon. Alex is a full-time realtor with Keller Williams Realty, and if you're looking to buy or sell a house in the Pittsburgh market, Alex is your guy. He's a member and a supporter of L3 Leadership and would love to have an opportunity to connect with you. You can learn more about Alex at pittsburghpropertyshowcase.com. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, they give every engaged couple a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. And so if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. As always, I like to end with a quote, and here's one that really has been impacting me lately. It's a Gerald Brooks quote, who I quote all the time, and he said this. He said, "As demands in our lives grow, our heart must also grow. There is nothing worse than a growing life, but a shrinking heart." So good. As demands in our lives grow, our heart must also grow. There's nothing worse than a growing life, but a shrinking heart. Hey, thank you so much for being a listener and being a part of L3 Leadership. Laura and I appreciate you so much, and we will talk to you next episode.